It's Friday, May 23rd, and it's 4:20 somewhere in the world. I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville. Produced and distributed by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C., this is your NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. Welcome to the most popular podcast regarding marijuana in all of America and all the world, featuring interviews with scientists, politicians, doctors, prohibition policy activists, regular cannabis consumers, musicians, artists, and NORML staff and NORML's board of directors, along with music and comedy no other podcast can offer. You can always find out more about the show at our website, stash.norml.org. and continue the education and conversation on our blog as well. We're ending marijuana prohibition with education, one listener at a time. The podcasting and blogging technology for the NORML Daily Audio Stash is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. Visit www.redaphid.com. Well, welcome to the NORML Daily Audio Stash for Friday. I hope you'll have a great holiday this Memorial Day weekend. Monday, I'll be remembering some of our best interviews on the Daily Audio Stash over this past few months, featuring Tommy Chong, Dr. Mitch Earlywine, Douglas Hyatt, and many more. For today's show, we visit with the E-Network of Cannabis News, CelebStoner.com's Steve Bloom, who breaks down the latest cannabis celebrity news. Then, for our musical break, we bring back some old friends, the Omega Project. You may remember my interview with Carlos as he and his girlfriend were facing some serious marijuana arrest charges. Well, they got by with just a fine and some community service, and they're back on the stash to make more great music. Today's song is called simply Leaf. To conclude the podcast, I'm encouraging everyone to tune into my radio show on XM Satellite, channel 167, tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern. I'm interviewing Kevin Booth live, the director of the documentary American Drug War, The Last White Hope, and we'll be taking live calls at the bottom of the hour at 866-557-7377. I'm excited to get this movie in front of my mainstream political audience. Also, don't forget about Pass the Stash. You could win a free autographed DVD of Totally Baked to be given away a week from today. You just need to send an email to stash@norml.org with your funniest first-time pot smoking story. I'm going to help you get started by indulging a bit on my 75th podcast and telling you all my first-time pot smoking story. Finally, don't forget that every Saturday we're now posting the NORML Weekend Music Stash, where you can get all of the last 10 songs from our daily musical breaks in one podcast, suitable for your weekend party pleasure. If you have a band that would like to be featured on our podcast, please send us an email at stash@norml.org. So sit back and relax with some White Widow and enjoy your NORML Daily Audio Stash. Now it's time to take a look at the latest stories about marijuana from news organizations across America and around the world in our NORML Daily Audio Stash, Hemp Headlines. New Jersey patients and critics testify on medical marijuana bill. From NorthJersey.com. Desperately ill patients who say they need marijuana to ease their suffering and opponents who fear the spread of drug abuse testified passionately Thursday before legislators considering a bill to legalize marijuana for medical use. Proponents of legalizing medical marijuana told an assembly panel it eases symptoms better than other drugs. Critics worry about abuse. Scott Ward, who was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2006, told the committee that marijuana alleviates the symptoms of the disease and the side effects from the 12 prescription drugs, 40 pills a day, he takes. He says he smokes less than a gram, less than one joint a day. But the remedy has also stuck him in a predicament, said Ward, age 25. He said, quote, Johns Hopkins recommended marijuana, but the government says you can't use it because it's illegal. It's bad enough that you're sick. The risk is being arrested, end quote. Nancy Feder of Hillsborough said MS affects her legs with spasms and stiffness. Prescription drugs relieve the symptoms, but they make her wobbly and sleepy. A very small amount of marijuana helps more, she said. Quote, I measure it in puffs, not joints. 2 or 3 puffs relieve the spasticity and pain, end quote. Feder says she buys her marijuana in New York City, even though that state has not legalized medical use of the drug. Other speakers, however, testified that legalizing marijuana for medicinal use could spur drug abuse. David Evans, executive director of the Drug-Free Schools Coalition, said the bill should be defeated because medical use of marijuana has not been approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration. He believes there are approved medications that work just as well. Candace Singer, of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence New Jersey, also warned of abuse. Singer testified, quote, that will create more access and perceived availability. When there's a perceived availability, children will use it more, end quote. The proposed legislation would allow patients with debilitating illnesses, such as cancer, AIDS, or multiple sclerosis, to smoke or eat marijuana to relieve pain, nausea, and other symptoms. The bill would require a doctor's recommendation and would permit patients or their caregivers to possess 6 marijuana plants and a gram of pot. A gram of pot? These critics are getting worked up over a gram of pot? I don't even know how a law like that's going to work. How do you grow 6 plants but only harvest a gram of usable cannabis? The U.S. government joints are 3/4 of a gram. You're going to have MS patients like Scott Ward using up their 1 gram in less than 48 hours. Anyway, it's nice to see some of the old prohibitionist talking points trotted out again. Approved medications that work just as well? Hey, it's been a long time. Never mind that Nancy Feder and her prescription drug side effects, and never mind the puking cancer patients you're asking to swallow a pill. Oh, and look, children will use it more. An old favorite. Never mind that since medical marijuana has been approved, teen use of marijuana has declined in California and Oregon, and declined slightly or remained steady in the other 10 medical marijuana states. Ken Wolski, who's been a guest on the stash, notes that the assembly members didn't ask any questions about the medical efficacy of cannabis, only about how they would get it to the patients. This could be a good sign that lawmakers are on our side. National Post rebuts Barbara Kay. She says she'll be back. Well, the fur is flying in cyberspace. Yesterday I reported on the Barbara Kay story, Not Your Mother's Reefer, in Canada's National Post for my Reefer Madness segment. Most of what I posted also ended up as a comment on her story at the website. Now, the editorial board of the Post has responded with an article, Barbara Kay versus Mary Jane, and done a very good job of putting her reefer madness in perspective. Our stance was, and is, that as terrible as you can possibly make marijuana sound by the use of anecdote and by cherry-picking the scientific literature, you cannot make a credible argument that its public health and other social effects are as bad as those of alcohol and tobacco. So why treat them differently? And if we're not going to treat them differently, are we going to prohibit them all? As libertarian-minded editors, we hope not. We tried prohibiting alcohol. This policy had the effect of enriching organized crime, encouraging the sale of harder beverages that could be smuggled more easily, increasing addiction, and creating a constant danger from adulteration. If the underground marijuana market of today suffers from some of these ills, isn't it remotely possible that legalization would actually be beneficial? So after that rebuke, Barbara Kay has responded with the Schwarzenegger-esque column, I'll be back.
Moreover, when any column I write provokes so much hysterical response, there seems to be an awful lot of Canadians for whom promoting the legalization of cannabis is a full-time commitment, it means there is a need for more public debate. Particularly so, since only the very naive, and the Post editorial board are unaware that the legalization of marijuana is the Trojan horse for the legalization of all drugs. Scratch any professional promoter of legalizing marijuana, and you will find an eager proponent of all drug legalization who knows that marijuana doesn't scare people and therefore makes a great wedge issue. So back at you in my next column. A final note to all you indignant puffers who accuse me of wanting you all thrown in jail. I have never been in favor of the criminalization of smoking pot and never said that I was. Put that in your pipes and smoke it.
Well, you know me. That's not the kind of thing I can just let slip by. My retort is posted in the blog at stash.normal.org. I kind of challenged her to a debate here on the Daily Audio Stash. I doubt she'll take me up on the offer, but I'll let you know. Libertarian presidential candidate Bob Barr kicks off convention with the Marijuana Policy Project. From the Washington Times. Denver, Colorado. Bob Barr has been to the dark side, and they do indeed have cookies. The Libertarian National Convention kicked off yesterday with a tea and cookies reception hosted by the Marijuana Policy Project, featuring none other than Mr. Barr, the party's leading candidate for its presidential nomination. Such a scene would have been unthinkable a few years ago, when Mr. Barr's name was synonymous with the war on drugs. In 1998, he authored the Barr Amendment, which prohibited the District of Columbia from voting to permit medical marijuana use and became a lightning rod for drug legalization advocates. But times have changed. After leaving the Republican Party in 2006, Mr. Barr denounced the federal drug war and became a lobbyist for his former nemesis at the Marijuana Policy Project. One of his top priorities during the last congressional session was the repeal of his own amendment, which has remained part of the Congressional Appropriations Bill for the District of Columbia, even though Mr. Barr left office in 2002. Mr. Barr addressed his position on the drug legalization yesterday in an online conversation with the Rocky Mountain News. Mr. Barr said, quote, "Regarding the drug war, I've been there, done that, and know firsthand our current strategy is not working. Continuing to have the federal government run roughshod over the states, even if the citizens of a state decide they wish to legalize medicinal marijuana, for example, is wrong. As president, I would completely reorient federal law enforcement priorities that currently are skewed far too much against marijuana possession and would consider all, and I do mean all, options." End quote. The Libertarian Party platform calls for the repeal of drug laws and the pardoning of nonviolent drug offenders. The platform reads, quote, "The suffering that drug misuse has brought about is deplorable. However, drug prohibition causes more harm than drugs themselves. The so-called war on drugs is in reality a war against the American people, our Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. It is a grave threat to individual liberty, to domestic order, and to peace in the world." End quote. I've spoken with former Representative Barr on the drug war issue. He told me that what changed his mind on the drug war issue was 9/11. He felt that after 9/11, the government had gone too far in usurping civil liberties, and that caused him to rethink the usurpation of civil liberties in the drug war as well. It's something I often bring up when people tell me they can't believe how our government is spying on its people, holding them without legitimate charges, seizing their property, violating their rights, all in the name of the war on terror. I reply, you haven't been following the war on certain American citizens using non-pharmaceutical, non-alcoholic, tobacco-free drugs then, have you?
Hello, I'm Paul Stanford from the Hemp and Cannabis Foundation, or THCF. Medical marijuana is legal in 12 states today, and THCF has medical clinics in 6 of those states. Our physicians help qualified patients obtain an authorization for medical marijuana in their state. Patients are eligible for medical marijuana with a history of either severe chronic pain and or nausea, cancer, AIDS or HIV, hepatitis, glaucoma, seizure disorders like epilepsy, chronic muscle spasms as in multiple sclerosis or asthma, neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's, and gastrointestinal disorders like IBS or Crohn's disease. If you or someone you know has one of these conditions, our doctors will help them obtain a permit for medical marijuana. THCF Medical Clinics has offices in Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, Nevada, Hawaii, and California. Call 1-800-723-0188 or go to the web at www.hemp.org or 1-800-723-0188.
As we approach the weekend, it's time to get caught up on all the latest celebrity news in the cannabis world with Steve Bloom from celebstoner.com. Steve, welcome back to the Daily Audio Stash.
Hello, Russ. How are you?
Oh, doing good. Looking forward to the weekend and just perusing the website at celebstoner.com. Got a lot of great stories up there. I noticed Whitney Houston finally got out of her pot charge. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was 8 years later. She was charged in 2000 when she was married to Bobby Brown. She got arrested at the airport, one of the airports in Hawaii, and I had thought the charges had already been dismissed, but apparently they hadn't been, and I guess her lawyers were working on this thing to get it dropped finally. So I guess it was.
Yeah, that's the weirdest thing. And Florida State University, Preston Parker, another athlete who's getting caught with marijuana and suspended from games. It seems like there's a whole lot of these athletes now that are getting popped for marijuana, especially in the college level.
I mean, probably more college athletes these days than professional athletes. I guess there's more of them. There's so many more college athletes out there. They tend to get caught a lot, and I hate to say this, but almost all of them are African American.
Yeah, and it's a shame too, because really it's kind of just a way of being able to cut their pay, because it causes their status in the draft to drop a few levels, and of course then they get paid less. So it's down
the road. I mean, especially if they have anything very close to the draft. That's what happened this year, or the most recent draft. Some of the guys who had their most recent legal problems were the guys who tumbled in the draft. If it happened, say, a year ago, they're a little more forgetful, but if it happened, a month ago, that everybody remembers.
Yeah, it's like bargain basement shopping for great talent, just because they enjoy using the substance that causes the least harm.
Or they have a failed drug test, on their record.
Yeah.
This guy, he's a wide receiver for Florida State, and they suspended him for 2 games for the beginning of next season because he pled guilty to pot and gun charges. So even 2 games was not so bad, considering some guys get thrown off the programs completely.
Yeah, that's true. In Florida State, that's a pretty high level program there.
Yeah, they're not going to throw their best guys probably to the curb so fast. They'll give them a little leeway.
Yeah. On the political side of things, a couple stories popped up. Of course, Minnesota failed to address their medical marijuana bill again this year. That was a shame to see. It's
kind of like New York, here where I live, where one side of the legislature is more supportive than another side of the legislature. And you get, you get excited because, say, the Senate or the House passes a bill, and then it has to go to the other side, and the other side just basically, doesn't want to deal with it, and so they don't let it get to the floor. And with Minnesota, for 2 years ago, the state Senate passed the medical marijuana bill, but the House has been holding back, and it didn't get back to the floor for the second year now. That's kind of similar stuff that's happened in New York, or it can actually ultimately get passed, and then it goes to the governor like it did in Connecticut, and the governor vetoes. So they were saying that the governor most likely in Minnesota was going to veto the bill anyway.
Yeah, that's just a shame. And great news though that came out in a new book from freshman Virginia Senator Jim Webb. His book Time to Fight had some pretty pro-reform quotes in it.
It's nice to see, that Barney Frank and Barack Obama are not the only ones, sort of on the right side of this issue at this point, that there's some support, in Congress. And Jim Webb's a freshman senator. He just came into office in 2007. He won in 2006. He was the guy who tilted the Senate to the Democratic side by winning, and he has a book, A Time to Fight. In the book, he says, the time has come to stop locking up people for mere possession and use of marijuana. He goes on to say it makes far more sense to take the money that would be saved by such a policy and use it for enforcement of gang-related activities. And then he goes on to further say, either we are, concerning, the number of people in jail, either we are home to the most evil population on earth, or locking up a lot of people who really don't need to be in jail for actions that other countries seem to handle in more constructive ways. That's pretty constructive as far as a commentary, on the subject. So it's good to see, somebody else in Congress standing up on this issue.
And it seems like, maybe with the exception of Barney Frank, but it seems like a lot of these people coming up are of a younger generation. Barack Obama, Jim Webb.
Exactly.
And no one's going to attack.
Kind of happening. I think, we were hoping, this might have happened 15, 20 years ago, or at least with the Clinton-Gore generation coming in, but they were still kind of hesitant to side with marijuana. It seems like now it's more okay for some politicians. At least some of these guys are willing to go in this direction. Chris Dodd's another senator who's favors decriminalization during the campaign when he was running for president. He came out in favor. So there's a bunch. You can start really counting maybe more than, on one hand.
That's so great. And no one's going to be able to attack Jim Webb on being some sort of hyper-liberal, left-wing person or anything. He decorated Vietnam vet. He came from a pretty conservative state sometimes. Virginia can be pretty conservative in parts. And, I wouldn't call him ultra-liberal. So I think that's great that we get that from a more moderate Democrat.
There is some talk about him being a VP candidate for Obama, so we'll see. It'd be interesting. So you have Obama, who, I strictly believe is in favor of decriminalization. Now you have Webb as well, so you'd have 2 for 2 there.
I was scrolling through the site also and saw one of our favorite celeb stoners, Snoop Dogg. And this is for real? Snoop Dogg was on a soap opera?
He was on One Life to Live. A couple of weeks ago, he made 2 appearances on One Life to Live. I guess he probably shot it all in one day, and they spread it out over 2 shows. It's an hour-long, long time, daytime soap, which, to be honest, I'm not very familiar with the characters or the storyline. But, once you, watch it a little bit, it's, it feels very familiar with all the usual backstabbings and romantic, complications that go on in everybody's lives. But Snoop Dogg showed up to basically perform for some organization that's connected to the show, within the storyline. And so he was just basically there. He did, with one episode, he did his song, Sensual Seduction at the end, and there was just a couple of scenes with him in a limousine heading to the show. And then the second episode, the next day, was a little more involved. Snoop Dogg had lines. He sort of met somebody at a bar, and they seemed to have a history. And he apparently wasn't supposed to come back to this town. Maybe he has some record in the town. He was kind of run out of town, and then he made good and went to L.A. He's back in his old haunt, so to speak, and wherever this town was. There's a name for it. I forget what it's called. And but it was pretty funny because in the bar scene, all the cast surrounded him a lot, and then there was a funny little exchange he had with some older women about his language that he has, his sort of unique jive, fashizzle, my nizzle language that Snoop Dogg has, and he was teaching them that. And so it was kind of funny. It was just sort of funny to watch that. And he also had a specific drink that we kind of got a kick out of. He had this Landy XO over cranberry when he ordered a drink. So now, if anybody's ever in a bar and they run into Snoop Dogg and they want to buy him a drink, I think that's the drink that he likes. Landy XO is a cognac, an expensive cognac, about a $75 bottle of cognac, and he likes to mix it with cranberry. I bet that's in the script because that's what he drinks. I doubt it's just anything.
Not an accident.
It kind of had, it kind of came off of his tongue like, this is what I drink.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny to get a little insight there. There was no pot smoking on the show, nothing even slightly. And then he took off. He did his next performance, which was Life of the Party, which was a lot of fun. A live performance with all his group there. And, Snoop Dogg has a very large group, and he's kind of like, with James Brown gone, who's sort of left to have, like, really large entourage shows, going around. And Snoop Dogg's show is a little bit like that. It's like a variety show with a lot of different rappers coming up and helping him, and he's got a live band and a lot of action on that stage. So it was kind of fun to watch. It was an unlikely venue for Snoop Dogg, to be on daytime TV. But, for fans, it was worth checking out. And you can see the video clip at Celeb Stoner.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and even though there's no marijuana references in the show, I mean, everybody knows Snoop Dogg is one of the big celeb stoners out there. So this is just the continued mainstreaming of our culture. We're seeing it everywhere.
I agree.
Wow.
I agree. No question.
Well, it's been a great week, and thanks, Steve, for joining us again here on the Daily Audio Stash to give us all the latest news from celebstoner.com. And we also want to remind folks to go out and get your copy of Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life. And how is that doing right now?
It's doing great. It's already gone into a second printing. The second printing will come out in July. The first edition came out in April, 4/20, and all the orders were... there was so much advance orders for the book online and at the bookstores that are selling it. It's at bookstores everywhere. They pushed it into a second printing very quickly, which was exciting for us. And we were able to actually to add a page to the book with Seth Rogen in the book. We're going to have, because his movie Pineapple Express is coming out around that time, and we wanted to promote that a little bit via the book. So we, Shirley, my helper, my co-author, did an interview with Seth Rogen that we're adding. So that'll be the one new thing in the book that we'll have. And, you know, in the new edition, it'll just be maybe, if anything, a couple little corrections and stuff, or maybe a typo or two that's floating through the book. Otherwise, we really didn't make any changes. And by the way, Seth Rogen was voted the latest top celeb stoner by the readers of Celeb Stoner.
Well, all right. Well, thanks, Steve, and we'll get all those links up on the Stash website as well, so people can check it out. Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life. Thanks for joining us again, Steve.
Happy Memorial Day weekend.
All right. Happy one to you.
Just say no.
No matter what you call it, it's a huge part of popular culture.
Where'd you learn that, Cheech? Drug school.
You don't need weed school. You just need a copy of the new book, Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life.
Hey, this is great, man.
Even if you never smoked marijuana.
I never used marijuana. Sorry.
Don't think you smoked marijuana.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two and didn't inhale.
Or you used to smoke marijuana.
I inhaled frequently. That was the point.
Pot Culture by former High Times editor Steve Bloom and Shirley Halperin will answer every question you ever had about marijuana culture.
Has that marijuana made it back up here yet?
Check out Pot Culture, the A to Z Guide to Stoner Language and Life at Amazon.com or visit potculturebook.com today.
Too bad, man. I just stopped smoking yesterday.
Here at the NORML Daily Audio Stash, we work hard to change our nation's marijuana laws through education and discussion. But we also take the time to relax and unwind with an eclectic mix of pod-safe music from many independent artists. We look for music that speaks to the growing truth about cannabis, or music that speaks to broader themes of freedom, liberty, social justice, equality, and protest. To find out more about the artists and download the music you hear on this podcast, just log on to stash.normal.org. And if you'd like to get your music heard by the online cannabis community, just send us an email at stash@normal.org. Hey, happy Friday to you, Stashers. We've got an update and another great toker-friendly tune from the Omega Project. Carlos, Frank, and Patience return, bringing their A-game with today's tune, Leaf. A classic jam, funk, reggae, rhythm, and festival band, the boys live up to the hype with another big song featuring Carlos in his rich voice, Frank in his tight rhythms, and Patience slamming on the bass. You might remember that we interviewed Carlos Cardona on his birthday in April, and he had quite a tale to tell about an unfortunate encounter with the law. We're happy to report that our hero will not be spending any time behind bars. He was levied a hefty fine and will be spending considerable time doing some community service, so zip over to the Omega Project's website and leave them some love and good wishes in their guest book. You can also hear and purchase some of their incredible music on their website at omegaprojectmusic.com. Ain't no one should be punished for loving some Leaf. This is the Omega Project with Leaf.
And begin. We're now going to progress to some steps which are a bit more difficult.
Innocent love.
Now it's time to play Pass the Stash, where you can win cool prizes from NORML.
Hey, hey, who found the law?
Okay, for our latest Pass the Stash contest, you could win the uncensored DVD of Totally Baked, written by Craig Shoemaker and autographed by the executive producer Brian Johnson, the lead singer of AC/DC. It's a hilarious story of two medical marijuana activists who hide out in the home of a straight-laced dad and take him and his debate team friends hostage. While the activists employ creative strategies to convince the squares on the truth about cannabis, a Rod Serling-esque narrator, Shoemaker, weaves us through commercials, stand-up, documentary interviews, and skits that are interspersed throughout the movie.
Hey, hey, who found the law? Yeah.
All you have to do to win your autographed copy is to send me an email at stash@norml.org. All I want to know is your funniest first-time pot smoking story. Now, limit your story to 420 words or less and send it in now. This contest only lasts 2 weeks. The winner will be announced May 30th. By submitting a story, you agree to have it published on the Stash blog and read on the air, but we will be glad to change names and identifying details to keep you anonymous. So send in your funny 420 story today and win your autographed free copy of Totally Baked DVD. And thanks for playing Pass the Stash.
The chicken made it to the giant laughing on the rest. The monkeys in the kitchen, the donkeys in the house. Hey, hey, who found the law? Yeah. Hey, hey, who found the law? There was a rocket coming from the attic. Hey, hey, who found the law?
Well, I'm getting a lot of entries for the Pass the Stash contest this time on your favorite first-time funniest pot story. And it is my 75th show here for the Daily Audio Stash, my 75th podcast, and I thought I'd take a little moment here to just indulge a little bit and tell you my favorite first-time pot smoking story, my own. I come from a family background of alcoholism, as a matter of fact, and my dad was a drug and alcohol addict, so growing up as a kid, I'd kind of sworn that I would never get involved with drugs. I kind of believed all the reefer madness stories at the time. When I got to be about 16 years old is when I first started experimenting with alcohol. And from the first experiment, I learned to use it quite a bit from that moment on. Became quite a problem in my life, using way too much alcohol, kind of like the old movie Animal House, the Bluto character. I could drink faster and more than anyone else that I knew. As I approached my 20s, I was also beginning to play music in various bands. And one band in particular, I joined a rock band in the early 90s, and we were performing up in the resort town of McCall, Idaho, for 4th of July, 1990. And that night, after we had completed the gig, myself and a couple of the guitar players and the drummer and the singer, we all retired back with the sound man to the hotel room, and one of the guitar players, pulled out a joint. This had been my first time. I was age 22 years old, and my first time ever seeing marijuana, and there they were, ready to light up. And that time I had to make that decision whether or not I was going to try the dreaded reefers. Well, the joint got passed around, and I skipped it the first couple of times, just wanting to see what would happen to these guys that I knew once they started smoking marijuana. One of the guys was the guitar player named Matt. Very good friend of mine. We're still excellent friends all these years later. And it just turned Matt into a giggling fool. It was so fun to watch. He took a couple of puffs and they started talking, and he started laughing about something uncontrollably. He laughed so hard that he threw himself back against the bed, but he kind of threw himself too far and ended up hitting his head on a radiator. And that, of course, made the rest of us laugh too. And then he started, his head hurt. He's rubbing his head. Oh, he hurt his head so bad. And we started making fun of him about how badly he'd hurt his head. So he began laughing again, and swear to God, he laughed again, threw himself back against the bed again, and hit his head again on the same exact radiator. So after seeing that, I kind of thought to myself that, other than making you a little silly, maybe this marijuana isn't so bad. Well, I finally did. I let the joint make its way to me and took my first couple of puffs. And after getting the feeling, getting the high coming on, I distinctly remember thinking to myself, this is what they've been warning me against? This is why they'd rather have me drinking alcohol and getting hangovers and puking on my shoes and being a jerk? This is the big deadly reefers that they've been talking about? From that moment on, I pretty much began to use cannabis in place of using alcohol. At this point, I'm hardly an alcohol drinker. I might have an occasional margarita now and then, but the crazy abuse of alcohol that I had used in my 20s, that virtually just went away once I started using cannabis. And my cannabis use wasn't any sort of problem either. I've been using cannabis, like I say, since July 4th, 1990. And aside from the prohibition of cannabis that prevents me from getting certain jobs, it's pretty much been a non-factor in my life as far as being able to be a productive and competent citizen. So that's my first time. July 4th, 1990, with a whole bunch of musicians in the resort town of McCall, Idaho. So send in your funny cannabis stories to stash@normal.org. We'll read them here on the air. We can keep you anonymous, too. You don't have to make your name known to everybody out there. But I think the more that we share these stories and people realize that marijuana really isn't that big a deal, the easier it makes it to pass all of this legislation that so desperately needs to be passed to protect not just the medical patients, but also the recreational users of cannabis, and to help our farmers that could be growing industrial hemp. That's why I'm here day after day putting together the daily audio stash in the hopes that just a little bit more education, maybe one or two more people learning about the truth about cannabis, can help to set it free. Thank you for downloading the NORML Daily Audio Stash, the growing truth about cannabis. We are produced by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws in Washington, D.C. Our executive producer is Alan St. Pierre. Our deputy director is Paul Armentano. Our webmaster is Brian Judy. And web production is provided by Red Aphid Interactive Media. As always, you can catch up on the latest information about marijuana at www.norml.org. and you can interact and download from our Audio Stash blog at stash.normal.org. For everyone here at NORML, I'm your host, Radical Russ Belville, hoping all your harvests are bountiful and your encounters with law enforcement are non-existent. We leave you today with a cannabis quote from John McCart, a Canadian justice, who once said, quote, "Cannabis is not an addictive substance, does not cause amotivational syndrome, and health-related costs of cannabis use are negligible when compared to the costs attributable to tobacco and alcohol consumption." End quote. So absolutely true. Nobody ever says that cannabis is harmless, but its harm is far less than that of alcohol and tobacco, which we seem to accept, tax, and regulate. I'm Radical Russ. Have yourself a great Memorial Day weekend. We'll talk to you again next week, and until next time, take care of each other, tokers.